Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee Shop Philosophy. As always, I'm your host, Killian, managing editor for Being Libertarian, LLC. Just a few things I want to touch on before I hop right into the episode here. Big thank you to everybody out there following the author page that I have, just Killian Hobbs-author that you can find on Facebook there. We just recently passed 2,000 likes, so definitely impressed to see that many people care what I have to say. So for those of you out there listening that are a fan of the page, definite thanks to you. For those of you that aren't, make sure to go visit the page, give it a like, and get little more frequent updates than the once a week that you're used to getting from me doing the podcast here. Assuming you don't also read my weekly articles that come out every Wednesday on Think Liberty there, the Bad Arguments series that I still have ongoing. Another thing I wanted to touch on as well, I just wanted to give a bit of a congratulations to Rocky Fahrenberg, as well as Samuel Klassen. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. I've only ever seen it in writing. Two new writers that we've actually just onboarded to Being Libertarian to be part of our in-house writing family. Of course, if you are interested in writing and you're looking for a way to submit the articles, you can actually go to beinglibertarian.com/contribute. It'll give you a whole bunch of information on how to send the articles in. It has a submission form right at the bottom as well for sending your articles into the site. And then depending on the type of content, you can see the articles getting posted to either Being Libertarian, to think-liberty.com, or if it's African content specifically, you can end up seeing it on rationalstandard.com. One last thing I'll mention as well, for those that follow the Being Libertarian page, you might be aware that we do have other pages that are part of the Being Libertarian brand, such as Being Libertarian Canada and Being Libertarian UK. Considering everything that's going on there right now and the fact that we do have a person that's living overseas at the moment, we have started a new page for Being Libertarian Hong Kong. If you haven't been following what's been going on in Hong Kong right now, it hits mental. There's people over there that are they're waving American flags and they are singing the American anthem, and they're demanding to have their own Bill of Rights and their own protections against the government. They're taking to the streets by the tens of thousands, which I know isn't all that impressive considering China's overall population, but still the amount of people that are showing their support for this and fighting for their individual rights over there is absolutely breathtaking. So obviously, as we have continuous updates on the situation and obviously all the other stuff that you know us for, so some good joke memes, the occasional article, things like that, all of that will be shared through that page as well if it's a topic of interest for you, or if you just happen to be interested in the Hong Kong area in general. So without further ado, I'll hop right into this week's episode. I feel that, one last note, I guess I could say, I feel I need to preface this a little bit because if you've been listening to my show for a while, you'll know that I am not the world's biggest fan of self-help books. I find a lot of them preachy or pedantic. I find that a lot of the advice that they give tends to be either very empty or you have to already practically be where you want to be. They kind of sell things as if it's this is going to get you to be a millionaire in a week and you're going to be happy about everything and every problem and ill in your life is going to disappear, when in reality you have to basically already be there for anything in the books to usually work. I'm prefacing it with that because I take the same kind of approach when I'm reading, not necessarily the feel-good self-help type books, but even when I'm reading books on like how to manage your money or, beginner's tips for investing or anything like that comes up that's tried to be marketed to people as this is the guide that's going to get you there. Like Rich Dad, Poor Dad is another great example of that. There's one though that I find is particularly a good book for this. It's actually a book that I just recently finished myself. Well, I should say refinished, because I'd read it once years and years ago, but hadn't really paid attention to the advice at the time, and I really should have, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. For those that you haven't heard, it's a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. Now, this book is by no means new. The book originally came out in I think it was early 1900s. And in the book, it was a collection of different parables. It was written by George S. I gotta try to remember his last name. I want to say Klassen. I want to say it was Klassen. Apologies if I got it wrong there, but I'm pretty sure if you search for The Richest Man in Babylon, then you'll be the first result, I'm sure. In the book, though, he took a different approach, and this is something that I liked with this, and I would like to see used more often as a teaching tool in general. Almost every bit of advice that he has in the book is actually based on a series of pamphlets that he used to hand out. So they used to print off and create a whole bunch of different pamphlets, but they were parables that tried to offer the advice that were set in ancient Babylon. So these stories all took place supposedly 8,000 years ago, back when Babylon was the richest city, and because of its location and everything else, it only really became the richest city because of the sheer ingenuity of the people who lived there and their understanding of profit and their understanding of money and interactions and all that other sort of stuff. So, if you're thinking of some guy back in the 1900s wrote a series of parables about money in the 1900s, how is that going to apply today? A lot of the stuff that was written was very straightforward, very basic, and most importantly, easily testable. And that's one thing that I find with a lot of different financial advice that's offered in books like this, is that you're not going to really see any kind of major results inside the kind of time periods that they suggest, unless you already have the type of financial situation where it just means that you need to give your head a shake and do one or two things right, and then all of a sudden all your money falls into place and lines up properly. The advice that was given in the book here was given back when, $1 could buy you, your groceries for a week. This was back when, wages were low. People worked a hell of a lot harder than they used to, than they do now, I should say. They used to work a lot harder back then, more hours, everything else like that. And yet the advice that was given was probably just as sound today as it was back then. Let me stop saying that and get into the advice itself. One really interesting concept in the book is the idea of paying yourself. So in one of the first parables that they include involves two relatively poor tradespeople talking to each other and trying to figure out exactly why they are poor. For all the effort that they put in, all the time that they spend working, how much they've mastered their craft, so on and so forth, they try to figure out exactly why they are poor. So they go and seek out a friend who is the richest man in Babylon to ask him how he obtained his wealth, whether it was through divine grace or a massive inheritance, or like what he had to do to get and maintain the kind of wealth that he held. One of the first pieces of advice that's given is that you should always be willing to go out and seek advice. That's one of the first rules that they include, is that you should always be willing to seek advice. You should be careful who you get your advice from, because if the person doesn't actually know what they're talking about, if it's not their area of specialty, that doesn't mean that their advice is going to be worth anything. For example, I'm a guy that just happens to have a podcast. That doesn't mean that you should be taking investing tips from me. If I tell you that I think a certain thing's going to go up or a certain thing's going to go down, I'm not an economist. I'm not a stockbroker. You can maybe listen to what I might have to say about that if I can back it up properly, or if I'm just telling you some kind of inkling on it, but don't treat those types of things as definitive, because I am not an expert in those fields. So that's one of the first key advices that it gives. But the big one, and this is one that's repeated throughout the book, and this is something that I think anybody listening should, at least for a little while, give it a shot and see how it works out for you. One key principle that they stress is saving 10% of your income. That's the amount that you pay yourself. So when they're talking in that first parable about where money is going and everything like that, it frames it where whenever you're spending money, what you're really trading is your time. You're trading the time that you spent laboring to earn that money, and you're immediately handing it over to someone else for whichever service that they might offer, whichever good they might provide. Now, I mean, this is just the basis of markets, of course, is the fact that you're going to have those types of exchanges. However, more often than not, when we're spending money in that sense, a lot of the money that we spend is either for things that we might not need or things that are really just a cost of being alive. Things like, and on today's terms, instead of the terms from 8,000 years ago, it'll be things such as, having a car, having the car insurance for it, the gasoline to keep it going, because you need those things all together in order to go to your job to begin with in most cases. The food that you have, your rent or mortgage, the little costs of life, even just basic clothing. And, you can't own just one pair of pants, one shirt, you can't do that. Same thing with, basic running water, rent, heat, hydro, so on and so forth. This is you paying other people. Like, sure, you're enjoying the services or taking advantage of the offerings that they have in exchange for your money, of course, but it's not just money lost for the sake of money lost. But when we think of actually paying people, when you labor for something, your employer, or if you're more entrepreneurial, your customers, they pay you for the labor that you put in. Afterwards, though, when you're paying out to all these other people, all these different stores and everything like that, you're not actually paying yourself for your own work. You're not putting anything towards yourself. So one of the pieces of advice they stress is the idea of saving at minimum of 10% of your income. If it's the very least that you can do, make sure you put 10% aside. If you can do more than that, then do more than that. But that's one of the key things that they really have as a push point, because you need that kind of money, not just as a nest egg to sit in your bank account and make you feel good about having the money there. Though they do talk about the psychological benefits of just having extra money available if you need it and having that stress removed from your life. But they recommend the 10% amount because, A, with a little bit of tweaking to most budgets, you can usually shave 10% off if you're in the kind of financial situation where it seems like all your money's going as fast as it's coming. If you some form of active budgeting and creating a plan and sticking to the plan that you have, you can usually the money that didn't necessarily have to go out and go towards the things that you were putting it towards. And it's all small things that you wouldn't expect to add up the way they do. Things like smokers, the cost of smoking in general. At least in my country, it's expensive. I know it's a fair bit, sure, and it's a dig in the pocket. Hot summer nights when you're in your car, keeping it all through and find where you can save that little bit extra in each different category. And by doing that, you set yourself up for the success of having that extra money. Stresses is what you're supposed to do with that money. Because again, you're not supposed to just sit on it and have it there to make you feel good. Side, and you invest it. You find ways to invest. Everybody has a different approach when it comes to investing in portfolio management, things like that. Making sure that whenever you're doing any kind of investment that you take on, investments that even if lower for the return, you make sure that that principal investment is protected so that you're constantly have a slow gain on income than it is to potentially lose if you're more of a gambling type, or if you have some really advanced knowledge when it comes to the risks and take them. I myself am not an investor. It's not, or at least I should clarify, it's not something that I do professionally. which means, I'm not going to call myself an expert when it comes to the ideas of investing. I know some of the basics and I get a lot of the concepts that are used because, I wouldn't be able to say I have the understanding of general economics that I have if I didn't have at least above a layman's understanding when it comes to direct investment management. That said, though, if you're on the lower end of the scale as far as your investment knowledge is concerned, then it makes more sense to take the low risk options and try to keep the principle in place. At least that's what this particular book has been trying to teach for the time that it's been around. One aspect that I really like in the book, and this is one of the little laws that it puts down, is the idea of hard work. So when they're talking about hard work, it mentions that you won't become successful by hard work alone, that it is practically impossible to become fully and completely successful solely by the merits of hard work. What makes you wealthy in the eyes of the author, or through these different parables, is the investments. It's the things where you make the money work for you to make more money. Your hard work can get you extra money if you push very hard and you put in a bunch of extra time, or if you always make sure you're at the top of the grade and you can get recognition for that, which might lead to promotions or other opportunities or different things like that. That's where you get the benefit from the hard work. And also, it's the primary source of income so that you can start building up your investments until they become the primary source of your income. But for any of that to happen, the hard work has to come first. So people that are, and this is something that I can't stress enough because I personally believe in it 100%. You're not going to have any form of success if you're not willing to put the work in. You have to be willing to be the guy that has your nose to the grindstone, just pushing day in, day out to get yourself to where you want to be. The harder that you work, now, you got to keep in mind, this is a little different in today's day and age where it's entirely just wage-based for the most part. Usually, most people get paid either a salary or they get paid based on the amount of time that they work rather than the actual effort that they put into their work. But there's still a lot of aspects where the effort you put in is tied to your performance. So, for example, it's not to your performance, I should say, but your performance is tied to your pay. So, for example, any form of sales job that involves some form of commission or bonusing or profit share, those are, right off the gate, those are the first ones to really look into. Another example, if you're on a job that doesn't have that, then opportunities for raises, opportunities for promotions. And a good thing to know with the hard work aspect too is we all know that strictly hard work isn't going to get you a promotion. It just doesn't. There's other aspects to work that you need to have some form of knowledge on that will get you to where you want to be. Most people don't get promoted strictly from their overall performance metrics, like just numbers on a graph sheet for how they're doing overall. They get there because of the kind of relationship they developed with their coworkers, with their management, the kind of traits that are related to management that they've shown off, the interest that they've shown in the position, and what they've tried to learn to be able to showcase that they're capable of holding those types of positions. Most people, they'll go about it the wrong way when they're trying to move up in a company. They'll throw all their effort into working really hard and making it look as if, they're the best of the best. But then they'll get passed over because if you're looking to get the next position in your company, if you're looking to get a form of promotion, then realistically, you're not going to need to prove that you're the best guy in the spot that you're currently in. You need to prove that you're going to be great in the next position based on what that position requires. So, and that's something that they kind of leave out in the book when they really stress the whole hard work aspect. But it's something that really needs to be understood, especially in today's day and age where, a straight nose to grindstone approach doesn't quite cut it anymore. You need to know exactly what you're looking for. And this is something that they do talk about in the book a little bit, which is actually creating a plan. And, one thing that I always use whenever I'm doing some type of planning, whether it's for stuff for the website, my own life, et cetera, one of the key things that I use for that is something called SMART planning. Again, very old business concept, very simple topic. If you just search SMART goals, you'll get 1,000 different results and probably free charts to use and everything else like that, where it just breaks down how to create your own goal set. So the 5 letters of it, SMART, specific, measurable, attainable. There's different versions with different A's. There's also different versions with different R's as well. Some are, is it realistic or is it reasonable? Or what's your reason for wanting it? Again, there's different versions out there. You can kind of go through it to find the one that you like. And then the T is the timely aspect, which is what's the kind of time frame that you're looking for it. I highly stress the value of using one of these, especially if you have issues committing to a plan, or, you're one of those types that, you create a plan and then you create a plan and then you create a plan, but in a very short time you find yourself falling through on whatever your plans are, whether it's financial related, work related, personal, whatever else have you. If you're one of those people that lapses quite often, then being able to write it out and have those kinds of specifics set out for you, where you're having to consider them right off the bat, that can make it a lot easier as far as actually achieving them is concerned. But that's just my own advice. I'll get back to the book now because it's a very short read, actually. It's something, I definitely recommend that anyone who has the opportunity to either find a copy online for free, or maybe a secondhand bookshop, or maybe even a bookshop itself, depending on the kind of price point they have for it. If they have it as a new copied book, if you get the chance to get a copy, definitely do. Like I said, it's really decent read. They do repeat a few things, like the 10% concept. They talk about maybe 6 different times when they talk about it, because you do need some form of initial capital in order to kickstart the idea of the investments and getting your money to make money for you and all that. One thing that's really interesting in here, mainly because it doesn't quite work with the way that crediting systems work now, but it still could work depending on the type of crediting system you have, which is pay all of your debts evenly with 20% of your income. Pay for you paying you. You don't give up on the 10% when you have debts, and then you work your budget around that. But the idea is that you put 20% income going towards debts, especially if it's going to be a long-term thing. Now, if you know that, if you spend a little extra, 2 months in a row that you can get out of debt or finish a debt off, then hey, by all means do that. Your income and put it towards them to bring all the debts down. That's very similar to what is consumer proposals usually involve the debts themselves being reduced in some way because you can't manage the normal debts. I actually used to be in the quite a few years ago. So when it comes to the negative side, like the end result credit, relatively knowledgeable there. So, but that's you try to avoid bankruptcy. It's just at that point with what you're doing to your. Now, the thing with the 20% though is that most of the time, if you look at the minimum payments where you're actually putting something against the principal, if we ignore what I'll call equity debts, so things where what you're paying off has a value. So for example, paying off a house, that is going to have a value. Every bit of money that you put towards paying off your house, well, it reduces what you owe on the house in total, but you keep the value of the house, and the value of the house can go up over time. Usually it doesn't go up over time, but it's a similar thing with vehicles. If you buy a brand new vehicle, like not just a, $3,000 or $4,000 used junker sort of thing, but you're buying an actual brand new car, yeah, they usually depreciate over time, and obviously with the wear and tear and the mileage and everything. However, it's still an asset. It's still something that you own that is of significant value. If we ignore those types of debts, if I'm just talking about just a straight, credit card debt, lines of credit debt, student debt, things like that, most of the time, if you look at your monthly payments versus your income, if you're paying towards the principal and everything like that, chances are you're not paying 20% of your income just to your debts. Chances are you're paying less than that, in which case you can up that to 20% and start to pay your debts down. Now, in the book, they recommend going evenly across the board to everybody. Now, that works, if you borrowed from, Peter, Paul, and Sally, and you're making an individual agreement with each of them and letting them know about what you're doing with everyone else to pay everyone's debts off. It works great with that type of system if you got, a bunch of personal debts that you're trying to resolve. But considering how debts with banks work, the same approach isn't the best option, especially with the way that interest and compound interest and everything else works. One technique, and I'm sure anyone who's ever dealt with debt or looked into it has heard of before, is what they call the snowball method, which is you do the basic amounts on all your debts. You pick one debt, usually based on either highest balance or highest interest rate, or you can kind of hit the middle ground if you pick whatever's charging you the most interest by dollar instead of just, percentage based. You can go after it at that point and start paying it down the most. And then when it's done, you take the amount of money you're putting towards that and put it towards the next one. And you just keep doing that until you're putting massive payments towards the last debt and finally clearing it off. Depending on how much you're putting out on it, the 20% method could work at that point. One last thing that I'll say about the book, that again I found really interesting with it, and this is why I think that it would be really good to see as a technique that's used more often, is the fact that it told these stories through parables. It didn't just flat out tell you to your face, this is how this works and here's the economic principle behind it working. It wasn't dry like that. Instead, what it did was it painted a picture. You could visualize the people having the conversation. You could see the kind of life conditions that they're supposed to be in. And it tells you how to solve the imagined problem that probably relates to your actual problems through the use of these stories. We see this with, Aesop's Fables is a great example of this, is being able to teach some of these important stories through the medium of fiction. Now, it's a little heavy-handed, not, Ayn Rand heavy-handed, where, an entire chapter is one character's speech, which is just her philosophy just written out. You don't run into any of that, really, but at the same time, using fiction in this way can be very beneficial to being able to get the point across and being able to showcase the idea in play. Even though the idea in play is really only in play inside of a fantasy setting. Half of the early, capitalistic libertarian arguments were all based on Crusoe examples, where you start off with a guy on a desert island with, absolutely nothing going on, and then they add certain elements and they kind of explain the idea based on this imagined scenario. The fact that we don't use this type of method to teach more things, I find, is relatively shocking, considering just human beings' love of a narrative. But with all that said, though, it's, like I said, it's a great book overall. There's a lot of different rules and ideas that it has for being able to kickstart some of your finances off. If you're a person that, has had issues with finances before or would like to have a better handle on it, but you're just not sure where to start because of just how massive of a beast multi-level financial management can be. For the small things that it starts off with, I'd say that, it's a great book to kind of look into. And just to throw it out there, this is a random book I picked up for $5. I was on a sale here. It's not it's not like someone from a publishing house is giving me money. I would absolutely love it if someone from a publishing house gave me money. So if you're out there listening to this, I will hawk books for cash. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that. Well, I would if I liked the book, but if I liked the book, I would do it for free. So that's beside the point. Yeah, if you do have the chance to find a copy of it or find it online or whatever else, do read through some of the principles that they have available and do try some of them out. I always recommend giving an idea a try to see where it goes, measuring it every step of the way to kind of track its progress and experimenting with it. But it never hurts to give something a try if you're not happy with the way that things currently are. Because, the tried and true definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It never hurts to try a novel idea out. There's a lot of things that, you might have thought of, but you didn't actually see it worded in a certain way or didn't see the proper case for it, in which case there's a lot that you could get out of it. And I think that some of these principles, like the working with set percentages of your income as far as saving and investing is concerned, again, I particularly like the idea of paying yourself. If it's one thing that especially people are not that good at, it's actually paying themselves. They'll go and, they'll treat themselves by spending a bunch of money on maybe clothes they don't need or a higher grade car than they actually require or little things like that. But actually putting money aside for yourself is something that I know, especially with my generation, the millennials, are not particularly good at. So with that all said, I'll close the episode off here. One complete side note that I want to throw out there, because I hear a lot of talk about, the millennials. A lot of the millennials now, especially the earlier end of what is considered the millennials, they're getting closer to 40 than they were 30. Just something for people to keep in mind when they're talking about, millennials. It's not as much as I dislike a lot of the things people in my generation do, because I think it's absolutely insane. Millennials is no longer just a term for kids these days. That's the Gen Z kids that are coming up that are eating Tide Pods and licking cakes in random stores and licking tubs of ice cream or whatever other stupid thing they're on to this week. But just want to put that out there as a clarification point, because I find that that's one that gets missed often. Anyway, if you have any suggestions for books or anything like that you'd like me to read or talk about, by all means, you can message me directly through Killian Holmes, author, the Facebook page there. You can send a message to the page. If you're not on Facebook and you're listening to this, or you don't like doing it through Facebook Messenger and the like, you can also email me directly at killian.holmes@beinglibertarian.email. Yes, that's .email, not .com. It's a weird thing with the way our tech guys set everything up. If you have an idea for a guest for the show, or you have something particularly you'd like to talk about that you think that it would be worth me having you on as a guest, again, same points of contact for you to come through and talk to me here. But otherwise, as always, if you liked what you heard and you'd like to hear more, I'll see you again next week.